So welcome to our meetup today, everybody. We have a special guest. Florent is here from Neo4j, and he's going to be talking about migrations in a schemaless world. I got to click on the right window. There we go. So our agenda today is pretty straightforward. It's the same as it always is in our meetups. We're going to talk about why we're here, our expected code of behavior among our participants. We're going to show you guys how you can do an introduction really quickly without having to actually talk. You can just change your name on the screen. And then Florent will take over after that. And when his presentation is done, we're going to have a Q&A. And then we'll talk about our Liquibase product updates and our community updates, and then we'll be all done. So we're thinking it'll probably take about 45 minutes, an hour-ish. So we're glad to have you here. So speaking of, this is why we're here. We're here to make connections within the Liquibase community. So that you can have peers, you can ask questions when you run into an issue, or if you want to understand something better, and to share that knowledge with other people, because that's one of the great things about open source community, is that the people who are more experienced help lift up the people who are new, so that everybody can learn and help and participate together. This is our code of conduct. I think everybody probably is familiar with this concept because every conference you go to has their own code of conduct. But basically, we just want to make sure that everybody stays respectful of each other. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. So this is now, it's Florent's turn. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Thank you. Let me start sharing mine. All right, hopefully you all see it.
Yes.
Thanks for having me today. So I will try to tell you a little story about how the Neo4j extension for Liquibase came to be and the kind of specific challenges it faces, because Neo4j, as you may know, is not a relational database. So let's start. So my name is Florent, or Florent, or Flo, or whichever way you want to pronounce it, I don't really mind. I currently live in Paris, France, and work at Neo4j, the company behind, you guessed it, Neo4j, the database. And relevant to the Liquibase community, I suppose, I authored two projects. One is called Liquigraph, and it is no more, and has been replaced, as I will tell a little bit more in details later, by Neo4j extensions. So, to talk about the Neo4j extensions, I think I first have to talk about Neo4j and what it is, and what I mean by schemaless. Then we'll uncover what I mean by working together, between the two companies, between the core project and the extension, and between relational projects and a non-relational database. And finally, I will give a little demo to illustrate all I've tried to cover during the presentation. And then we'll have, as Tabby mentioned already, time for question and answers. But of course, if you have questions during the course of the presentation, please feel free to interrupt me. I'm more than happy to pause and try to answer. So let's try to understand together what Neo4j is. And for that, I usually give always the same comparison, right? Because most of us are familiar with relational databases. So that's what I always use this picture. And in this example, we have, person groups. So a person can belong to several groups. A group can have several people. And the way, so as a developer and DBA architect, you already know naturally, when you see this model here, you will understand it, right? You have a table for persons, you have a table for groups, and because it's an N-N relationship, then you have a joint table in the middle. But funnily enough, I showed this slide a couple of years ago to non-developer colleagues, and they did not, I tried to explain, the joint table concept, etc. They are not technical, they have not dealt with databases. They could not make sense of it, really. And I'm not lying, that's a real experiment I did. And then I showed the graph part, the graph on the right. So we have, in that case, we have a person belonging to three groups. So one row in the person table, 3 rows in the group table, and 3 rows for the association. And on the graph side, one way to do it, it's not the only way, but the intuitive way maybe is to have a person node. So that's what we call in Neo4j. You might have heard of Vertex also. That's another valid name. And then we have 3 other nodes for the 3 other groups. And the fact that the person belongs to a group will be modeled as what we call a relationship, or you can also read edge in the literature. So those are the 2 main concepts of a graph and of the graph database model of Neo4j as well. And if we zoom in a little bit, so we've seen nodes and relationships, but nodes can be grouped together with the notion of label. So for historical reason, a node doesn't have to have any label, but that's very rare nowadays, but it can at least have one, usually has only one, but can have 2, 3 or more. That's a way to group nodes together. And what makes Neo4j a database is because it stores data, right? And so the data itself, if it's not represented by the concept of the nodes, it's stored in the properties. So properties are just key value pairs, and a node can have 0 to many properties. And so in this example, I have a movie graph, with directors, with actors. And so if I look at the Da Vinci Code movie, so movie is a label because it's a kind of category. And I have 3 properties: the release date, the tagline, and the title. So that's just one example of what a node can look like in Neo4j. And then relationships are first-class citizens too. They also can carry properties like nodes, so 0 to many. They have a single type that characterizes what the relationship is about. It has a direction, and it links one node with another. So just a small parenthesis of direction. Not all domains need directions, right? So if you take Facebook, for instance, if A is friend with B, it means that B is friend with A. Whereas on Twitter, if A follows B, doesn't mean that B follows A. So those are 2 examples where direction does not matter or matters. And even though Neo4j requires a direction when you define a relationship, you can ignore it at query time. So that's a way to model directionless relationships, is specify an arbitrary direction and just forget about it when you query. So those are the 2 main concepts. They can carry properties, and that's how you model, complex graph, for real life scenarios. And also one nice part, by the way, when you compare those 2, I will come back to this picture, is you're all familiar with joins, and joins are global, right? There is no locality. It's not because 2 rows are next to each other that they have any kind of meaning in that locality. Whereas in the graph, you don't need joins to traverse a graph, right? That's also one key characteristic. Not only it's sometimes more intuitive to model, but also the way you traverse a graph, you will anchor, so find starting points, and then traverse, from node to node, traversing relationships, etc. So it's all local. It's all based on the, I don't not even know the name, like neighborness of nodes and relationships. So that's also one key strength of graphs. Like when you need some complex join query, it usually works out much better in a graph because it's just so much easier to traverse. And even though, so I talked about nodes, I talked about relationships, and I said nodes can have labels, so some kind of group. As I said before, relationships have one type. However, and that's why I talk about schemaless, is even though 2 nodes may share the same label or labels, that does not mean they will share the same set of properties. And the same is true for relationship types. So that's why, the more correct term in case of Neo4j is schema optional. By default, it does not enforce any schema, but you can use constraints like the ones listed there to actually enforce some kind of primitive notion of schema, like property uniqueness or existence, or mix the 2 with a node key constraint. So that's what the example shows here. I have 3 persons, so they all have the same label, but the property is completely different. Same thing for the follows relationship. I have 3 relationships here, and they don't have the same properties at all. So that's very flexible, very convenient when you start prototyping, but at some point, it's rare that applications need so many different kinds of labels and relationship types. So that's where Liquibase and Neo4j can play a part to help you, master the complexity of your model and of your schema. And so when I talk about working together, there is obviously, the Neo4j extension itself with Liquibase core, but I believe it's all about people as well, like the Neo4j is a company, Liquibase is a company, how we can working together. And then, of course, this relational vision of things versus a non-relational database, and obviously the projects, the code itself, how it works. So let's try to uncover those three dimensions. And the reason I'm giving this talk today is, so I was already a Liquibase user quite early when I started my career. And in 2014, I noticed something about Neo4j, reading a tweet about the CEO. So sometimes Twitter is useful, right? I read a tweet from the CEO talking about a presentation from a customer, and the customer were complaining about the lack of migration tools for Neo4j at the time. And I was quite familiar with Liquibase. I used it quite intensively in some projects before, and I was like, you know what? Let's just create something like Liquibase for Neo4j. And that's how Liquigraph came to be, which was inspired from, but didn't have any adherence to Liquibase. And because it was mostly a one-man project, one-person project, on my own free time, the bandwidth I consumed developing the project was not that much. And in the end, although the concepts were very similar to Liquibase, it didn't have so many features. And at some point last year, I believe its conversation started with Robert Reeves from Liquibase, and then Nathan, of course. We had the idea, you know what, why don't we work together and try to start creating a proper Neo4j plugin for Liquibase? And I felt it was the right time to do this because by that time I was finally working at Neo4j, and nowadays Liquigraph is gone. We have this plugin for Liquibase, and I get regular help from the very friendly folks from Liquibase. So thanks again, all of you, by the way, for making this happen, because without you, it probably have taken 10 times as long as it did. And the nice part about just developing a plugin, first, to get it working with the bare minimum functionality, it didn't require too much effort. So Nathan helped me a lot, bootstrapping the project. But in the end, there isn't much code to get it working. And the nice part about it, not only there is little code, but I get almost all of the features for free. And some features I never had time to develop for Liquigraph, for instance. So that's one of the great things, as we say, I'm standing on the shoulder of giants, and that's definitely the case here. Like this tiny extension is inheriting all these cool features that Liquibase has had for a long time. And also I'm gradually, as we will see, adding, so not only some basic support, for the query language, but also some high level refactorings, because I believe that's the main added value of Liquibase. It's just not running some queries, but also running some high-level refactorings, how to modify a table, add a column, etc., etc. So trying to translate these ideas to the graph world. And it might be hard to grasp right now if you're not familiar with Neo4j, but at some point when you get familiar enough and you want to start using some migration tools for the database used by your applications, you might ask the question, okay, when does it make sense to use a tool like Liquibase for my Neo4j database? And the reason the question is important is there is no strict delimitation between the data definition and the data itself. And that's probably not intuitive if you worked a lot with relational databases, right? You can define your table and columns, define your foreign keys, primary keys, etc. It doesn't translate 100% to Neo4j. You don't have like label definition and properties attached to those labels, and then you insert your data. No, the data is the schema is the data. So that's why it's sometimes hard to discern the two. And so the main added value of Liquibase Neo4j, even though the two columns, the things will end up the same, right? Your application data or your referential data, for instance, there will be nodes and relationships in a graph. However, you have to know the difference yourself, right? So the main added value of Liquibase, of using Liquibase for Neo4j comes with for managing indices and constraints, automate that, version that. And managing referential data, like data that is fixed, that does not change very often, and that is needed, by applications or by the standalone database. However, and it might sound obvious, but let's say you're an e-commerce company and you're persisting transactions because people purchase some items from your website, then this kind of data, of course, doesn't make sense with Liquibase Neo4j. So that sounds obvious, but again, remember that with Neo4j, there is no difference there is no difference between definition of data and the data itself. So again, whether it's referential data or application data, they are all nodes and relationships instead. So you have to know yourself how to make the difference between them. And so let's try to see how it works. So usually when I give this presentation, I give it to people familiar with Neo4j, but not so much with Liquibase. So the demo that I have goes through a series of many different steps just to show, the capabilities of Liquibase. In that case here, I will spare you the details you already know. So I'm just going to keep it simple. I'm going to go to the final step where everything is already defined, and you can see how it looks with the Neo4j extension. So in the example, the data itself is a bit fictional, a bit made up. So bear with me, but it's just to show you the kind of things the extension already supports. There are the change sets you know and love. The query language, so the equivalent of the SQL tag here, that's exactly the same actually. So Cypher is the query language of Neo4j. So that's a way to create a node with some property. And we support rollback as well. So that's in XML format, but you can also have Cypher. So that's the same as a SQL file really, when you can define the same kind of change sets. You also have preconditions, so the built-in one or the custom ones, for instance, matching the version of Neo4j or the edition, because Neo4j comes into two flavors, community edition for free, edition free under certain condition, or you have to pay for it, and the equivalent of SQL check. Actually, it's called SQL checks, it's just an alias really here, so that's the same thing. So you have support for these custom preconditions and existing ones, and you also have support, for all the things you love, and love. So as you can see, in that case, I'm just dealing with movies. So I will create a movie node. If I roll back, I will delete it. I will also add count, create a node with a count that will count the movie nodes. And then depending on the kind of Neo4j version I run, so in that case, I expect a Neo4j 4.4 and the enterprise edition. And this one is dummy, just to show a dummy example. I will also add a specific property to the existing count node. So let's just run it once and for all. So first I need to install Liquibase. So that's going to be fast because I already have it. So, so I'm on macOS. So in that case, I use a package manager of macOS called Homebrew. So that's how I download Liquibase, and then I download the extension and put it in the right folder so that Liquibase is aware of the Neo4j extension and can rely on it. So that's done. Then I just need to start Neo4j. I have several options for that. One of them is to download Neo4j desktop. You can run Docker. You can run pre-provisioned instances online with Neo4j Sandbox or Aura. In that case, I will keep it simple and run 4.4 enterprise with Docker. So that way I have a Neo4j instance ready for me. So it just needs to start up, hopefully soon. And when it does, yeah, here we go. We'll have access to the Neo4j browser, which allows you to run queries and see the data. So we'll start with nothing at all. So if I just run, I've not run Liquibase yet. I just started Docker image. So I will start with an empty database. So there is nothing at all. And now let's just run Liquibase itself. So the whole change sets I've shown with the movie nodes and the count node, etc. In which case it will just go through the change sets and delegate to the Neo4j extension to execute the things, and also run history to see what kind of change set have been inserted. So all the ones we expected. So here, so match is kind of the equivalent of select, by the way. I will just return all the movies of my database. So I have only one, which kind of makes sense. If I also want to look at the count, just to be consistent, let's just rename this. I have one movie in my database. That makes sense. Because I have some things in run always, as you can see in the example here, it's run always. If I somehow, let's say, insert a new movie, so if I come back to this, I'm probably going to run it here. So I should have a second movie in my database now. Yes, so I have my life and my second life, so another movie. If I rerun Liquibase, because it's run always, the count will be updated. So something you're already familiar with, but just to show you that, run always, and the other attribute also works. So if I update this, I will have a beautiful count of 2. And I can also roll back. So in that case, yeah, actually I won't do it because I didn't run the tag, but rollback is also supported. You can roll back to tag and come back to any version of your change sets. And that was a quick demo because again, you're all familiar with Liquibase, I assume. And so we've seen what we've seen in summary. We've seen also support like XML, JSON, YAML. There is an experiment currently in the Neo4j extension repository to support ASCII doc, so you can collocate your schema document, your database documentation, and your change sets. So that's something I'm slowly experimenting on. We've seen query, like the basic query support, which is alias to Cypher, some custom preconditions, tags and rollbacks that I didn't show, and also context and labels if you want to filter change sets. And one thing I didn't show at the end is the node merge refactoring. When you have, that's the first high-level construct, high-level refactoring that is specific to graphs, which is collapse nodes together and their relationships all together as well. So that's been a fun challenge, but that will be a story for another time. And it's ideas are always welcome. So there are things that I'm working on, like the load data support, for instance, how to load data from flat files and then get them into the graph. More graph refactoring, so that's for sure. Specific index changes, because the syntax from version to version of Neo4j, the Cypher syntax may change a little bit. So I don't want the users to have to deal with that. So that's why there is probably be a higher level change for this kind of things. And the last one, which is a question I get sometimes when I present the Neo4j extension, is how does it scale? And the scaling question is very specific to Neo4j, I believe, because there is no schema on one side and data on another side. So if the data is massive, the schema can also be massive. So schema operations may suffer. That's usually not the case, right? But if you have a referential data, you need to create and then update, and that referential data is massive, then it may make sense to actually split it in a batch. And so you move a little bit away from one change set, one transaction in that case, because the transaction rule would not be able to manage that much amount of data. But that's the kind of interesting questions that come from not having the same model as a relational database. And again, issues are open. If you have an idea that you think would make sense for the Neo4j extension, I would be more than happy to to hear about it and help implement it. And I believe that's it. So I hope I was not too fast. It's tough to give an introduction to such a big topic like Neo4j, but if there is anything that is unclear, please let me know. I will try to clarify.
Thank you. That was great. I'm going to take back the screen share here.
Yeah, and oh yeah, it's here.
I lost it for a second.
Yeah.
All right. So feel free, if you have a question, feel free to jump in and share yours. I found that I actually have a couple questions I wrote down in my notebook. So we ask that you please mute your mic if you're not speaking. I don't know if you guys can hear it, but my lawn crew is here because the timing is terrible, of course, hoping that they're far enough away that it won't be interruptive. But
I have a question.
Yes.
So I just added quote unquote Neo4j support for our Liquibase users in my company. So I looked at the formatting. I'm not familiar with Cypher at all, just barely. I use the examples on the GitHub. But my question is, the examples don't have any Liquibase formatted Cypher examples. I was really intrigued by that format. Do you have a site or a place where you have those examples? All the examples on the GitHub are in XML.
So yeah, thank you. That's a great question. So we have some examples indeed. Even if you look at the test itself, if you start looking at the source code, I don't have an example where the main changelog is in pure Cypher. Usually it's an included changelog. But you touch a very valid point, which is documentation. And at this point, it's very basic and not very satisfactory. So I will try to work on having a more comprehensive documentation, and I will also cover multi-format and give every example in multi-format. So that's also something on the back of my mind. As soon as Neo4j 5.0 is released, which is pretty soon, I will have some more time, and I will try to improve the documentation. In the meantime, the cheap trick is to reach out to me, which is not always super convenient, but yeah, definitely the documentation needs more love, and I will work on it.
Because it does actually support it, right? It's just kind of more of a documentation hasn't caught up with it.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, and I just wanted to thank you for addressing. I opened an issue on the GitHub around the shoot, what was it? It was the not providing the full zip. I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank. But
yeah, no, that's right, indeed. So yeah, I automated the releases, the release changelogs, so I didn't have to write them manually. But by doing that, I removed the binaries. So basically, they were missing from a couple of versions. So thanks for pointing that out, and now it's all fixed.
Yep, so thanks for addressing that quickly too. So thank you.
Yeah, and sorry for the problem in the first place.
No problem. It didn't really cause any sort of outage. It's just, going forward, we were trying to keep that plugin the same version as our main Liquibase version. So, yeah.
I see Ashok has is unmuted. Did you have a question you wanted to ask?
Yeah. So I have a couple of questions. So for the migration to Neo4j, so did you use Liquibase from any other database, like a relational database or anything? Like I used Liquibase for converting from DBT to Postgres Aurora. So can we use Liquibase for that?
So if I understand your question well, and please let me know if that's not the case, are you talking of migrations from one kind of database to another? Is that
yeah.
So actually, I mean, Liquibase might be a partial answer to that, like in which you would define those migrations. And you've got several projects out there, including, some kind of Cypher. So Cypher, as I said before, right, if you're not all familiar with it, is a sequel of Neo4j, as a concept of procedures, and you have some procedures out there to load data from other databases. So you could definitely install those specific Cypher extensions to your Neo4j server or cluster, and then define your migrations and use that. Like for instance, load from MongoDB or load from MySQL, and define your migrations this way. So that's definitely possible. But most of this is not really handled by Liquibase itself, by the Neo4j extension of Liquibase itself, but by the existing Cypher procedures that allows you to interact from the outside world to Neo4j, and vice versa, by the way.
Okay, thank you.
So APOC, so to give a concrete answer, and I will write down the URI, APOC is a known collection of useful Cypher extensions. So that's definitely something you would want to look at if you want to load some data elsewhere.
Okay. And we just started using Liquibase. So my question is, so in terms of loading the data or migrating the data from one database to another database, so is it really Liquibase supports that, or is just for the schema management, right? Not for the data loading, bulk data loading, right?
I
mean, I can let others answer to that, right? That's not a Neo4j specific question.
Nathan, you want to jump in and answer that one?
Yeah, I can. Yes, I would say Liquibase is really more about managing your schema for your kind of particular target database, making sure that your database is structured in the same way that your application is expecting it to be structured. The data loading sort of ETL kind of stuff that you may need to do, that gets out of the scope of what Liquibase is really about and what it's trying to do. We have some we have some tools, or we have some features in there, like we have a load data that Florent mentioned. There's a load data tag that lets you bring in a CSV file, but that's more geared towards your application's expecting some seed data, like a table of states that has the states loaded in there, and you want to make sure it's in there, more than kind of the complex, really sort of ETL tooling that you need to kind of sort of migrate that data from one system to the other. So while we have some of that, it's sounding like you're probably looking for something other than Liquibase for that, moving the data from your old system into Neo4j. And then once you get, you use Liquibase, you can use Liquibase to get your Neo4j database structured the way it's supposed to be, and for managing, new changes going forward in that. But the data transfer is probably something else will work better for you.
Okay, thank you.
So Tabby, I just read your question. Shall I answer?
Yeah, so my question was, I saw in one of the slides that you mentioned Neo4j Enterprise Edition, and I wondered if you would like to tell us what the different editions are that are available, and what are the main differences between them?
Sure. So usually your first experience with Neo4j, and that's going to blur the lines already, is to use Neo4j Desktop. And that's one of the cases when you can use Neo4j Enterprise for free, but usually Neo4j Enterprise is a paid edition, right? You need a license agreement, and you need to pay for that. And you have mainly two flavors: Community, which is completely free and open source, and Enterprise, which is closed source. You might be familiar with the open core model, like the core is free and Community, the rest is closed source and Enterprise. And the differences between these two, so you will get, Cypher and these kind of things, of course, in both editions. But you might get, for instance, more sophisticated Cypher runtimes, like the execution engines of the query language. You will get more sophisticated runtimes in Enterprise. You will get more integrity constraints in Enterprise as well. You will get clustering support in Enterprise that you don't have in Community. And you have like a lot of specific features like that. But those are the main three, I would say, like Cypher runtimes, integrity constraints, and the other ones that I already forgot. But yeah, those are the main differentiators, I would say. Oh, and clustering.
Thank you.
Welcome. But yeah, really, so if you're all curious about Neo4j, I really invite you to just try Neo4j Desktop, run through the tutorials. It's really like the learning journey is well designed, really. I'm a bit biased, of course, but you should give it a try, and you can learn the Cypher language gradually and painlessly, I think. So definitely worth a try, and you will get the Neo4j Enterprise version, so you can try some of the specific features I mentioned.
Yeah, if you want to put the link in the chat so people have easy access to it, that way they can click on it and after the meeting go look at it. And then we'll also put it, when we post the video, we'll put it in the description so people know where to go.
Yeah, I'll make sure to have all of those links in there.
Awesome. All right. We have several other people on the call that I'm curious to hear. If you have questions, I definitely want to hear that. If you don't have any questions specifically, I'd still be interested to hear if you're using Neo4j or if that's something your team is considering using in the future. I know Manoj and Gunther, John, Nikhil, Artur. I was just curious what led you to come to this meetup?
Hey, this is Chris. So I had a question, I think maybe related to that question. So we're actually using RDF graphs, and I think we're finding that there's a little bit more information around property graphs out there. And so we are in many ways trying to pick patterns from property graphs and see whether they can be applied to semantic or RDF graphs. And I guess that's one question I would have. How applicable, Florent, do you think that this is, you know, what you're doing with Cypher. Could you just do that with Sparkle? You know, could you try to write a plugin to Liquibase for Sparkle or that kind of thing?
Hey, yeah, thanks for your question. So it's been a few years. I haven't touched Sparkle, but as far as I remember, so the capabilities were almost the same. There were some things that you could not express in Sparkle. I think it was 2016 or 17. So take what I say with a grain of salt. At the time, at least, yeah, you could not express, like, for instance, when you had hierarchies, for instance, it was hard to express that with Sparkle, as far as I remember. So it's been a bit blurry. So that's, I believe, as far as I remember, Cypher were a bit more powerful in terms of expressiveness than Sparkle was, but maybe things have changed on the Sparkle side. I must admit, I've not followed that closely. And so in terms of support, I believe, yes, you could have an extension, a Neo4j, sorry. Actually, there are Neo4j extensions that support semantic graphs in a way, and I can link to that in a minute. But to write a Liquibase extension to support you know, triple stores and some, I believe it's totally feasible, right? I don't see what would prevent it, really. So I don't know if it answered all your questions, but please let me know if that's not the case.
Yeah, I mean, that's perfect. Just knowing that since you've already done this for property graphs, at least if you're able to say that you don't think it's impossible to do something similar for an RDF graph, at least, you know, tells me that it wouldn't be a waste of time to look into it. So yeah.
And most definitely, as far as I remember, Apache Jena was like one of the go-to projects to manage niche connectivity to triple stores. So that would, off the top of my head, if I had to start right now, I would probably start with Apache Jena and try to start to create a plugin based on that. But again, it's been a while. I've not evolved in that landscape. So, but I also invite you, by the way, there are regular live streams from the Neo4j community, and one of my colleagues is really deep into semantic technologies. I will try to find some resources soon to share it here. He's also, you know, drawing comparisons and between Neo4j and triple stores and this kind of thing. So that's also interesting to follow if you're interested in the comparisons. I will try to find some links right away.
That'd be awesome. Thanks.
All right, Gunter in the chat, thanks for answering. You're not currently using Neo4j, but you're here to check out possibilities, especially in conjunction with Liquibase. Is that something that you're thinking about doing, building an application, or is your application team thinking about using Neo4j? Are you really kind of, where are you in the process of kind of figuring out your journey?
Hello.
Yes.
So I hope I have not physically unmuted my microphone, the headset. So I'm basically working with enterprise ERP systems and straight with relational database. Many years in work with Oracle database, and with graph databases, you have many possibilities, especially there's many use cases with maps and so on. And so I'm checking here the possibilities when such requirements come. They will be taken into account, then it's shorter for release management, etc. And then you have the conjunction with Liquibase. So that's where I'm on this topic with Meetup. I've seen it. So that's why I'm here. Thanks.
Yes, excellent. No, thank you for sharing that. Makes sense. You're trying to figure out when the stack comes to you, because it will someday. How do you going to manage it and support it? Do you have development teams that are asking for things like that in your company right now, or are you just being very proactive?
it was only proactive. As we have a huge ERP system for a customer which operates worldwide and production side. It's a customer ERP system, and we're about maybe to migrate it from the old source, and all new features. There's a graph database is always in my mind for some requirements, and so check it on the proactive. Thanks.
Good, very good. Did you get all your questions answered today, or did you have anything else you wanted to ask?
I'm really new to Neo4j, so I've heard it a little bit conceptual, but so I'm not so deep into this in the scope right now.
All right.
And the question will come when we are hands-on.
No, that makes sense. Well, the Florent just did share the link to the Neo4j desktop, so maybe worth downloading and playing with to see what you think. I'm going to do the same. I haven't played with it yet, but it's now on my list. It's now actually sitting on my computer ready to install. Awesome. Thank you for that, Gunter. Anybody else want to share your story of kind of where you're at and what made you decide to come hang out and listen to Florent's talk? Maybe John or Manoj or Artur. Give you another chance to see if y'all want to share a little bit about what you're doing and what you're interested in and what made you decide to come here today.
Hello everyone, this is Manoj.
Hello, Manoj.
We were actually looking to see how Liquibase works with a schemaless solution. We are using MongoDB as our schemaless database solution. So I was interested to see how does the Liquibase sync up with any kind of a schemaless. We are already using Liquibase with Aurora Postgres, and we have plans to use it in future for the MongoDB solution as well. That was our my main motive to come to this meeting, and it was pretty informative. Thank you.
I mentioned we do have a MongoDB extension as well too, that kind of helps with getting the Liquibase support into MongoDB, because you do have a lot of kind of the same schemaless stuff with Neo4j, where there still really is a schema. It's that your application is expecting. It's just less managed and forced by the database. But yeah, so we do have a MongoDB extension that you can try out there, and definitely let us know kind of where it can be improved. We've not had someone like Florent being able to help really kind of drive and improve that. So it doesn't have like the Neo4j one, for example, has more change types, more beyond just kind of being able to specify the SQL or the MongoDB equivalent of SQL. But it's certainly things we can do, and we're also looking for feedback on how that could be useful as a MongoDB user. So take a look at that extension. As you find things that would be helpful for it, definitely let us know.
Sure, I will.
I'm just curious, have you started using MongoDB on your teams yet, Liquibase and MongoDB yet, or is that in the future?
So we are a pretty old MongoDB shop. And
okay.
We are in the MongoDB from the inception of MongoDB as a software.
Okay.
But for the Liquibase, we started last year, and we are almost on the verge of putting this into our production solution for the Aurora Postgres databases.
Mm-hmm.
And we are in the planning of buying the enterprise licenses.
Okay.
For the coming year.
Excellent.
Mm-hmm.
And MongoDB will be part of that, or is that separate?
As of now, we did not even thought of putting the MongoDB under that umbrella. for any kind of schema changes or the schema management. That is out of scope at this point of time for buying the licensing.
Sure.
But definitely, I will look forward, to see how it works with MongoDB.
Excellent. Like Nathan said, as your team starts looking at MongoDB and Liquibase, we'd love to jump on a call with you and understand your experience and understand if there are things that you think still need to be added. So we're probably about a month and a half out to start the process from a product perspective to understand that better and to meet with more people to see what's working, what's not working, and kind of where it needs to go.
Sure. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. One last ask. If anybody else had wanted to share kind of where they are or had any questions or comments about what we're talking about today. All right. Well, Tabby, I think it's over to you.
All right. So I'm gonna go over a couple of things real quick. So we have a few product updates. We released 4.15 on August 5th, which means that we're really close to releasing 4.16. So if you keep an eye out, you should see it within the next week, probably earlier than that, but I'm going to say week. This includes the new Liquibase flow command, but that is available for Liquibase Pro, and it's currently, I think it's currently still in labs. Is that right? Does anybody know? Yeah, so that means that you can use it in testing, but it's not ready for production yet. We had a couple of enhancements. You can always check the release notes. If you go to docs.liquibase.com, one of the main buttons there takes you right to the release notes. We also, as I said earlier, we are an open source at the base, so anybody in the community can come and contribute to solving bugs or adding features or any of those things. So these were our first time contributors for the last month. It's always exciting. I really wish that they were all here so that I could give them a big high five. But we really appreciate the participation and the contributions that people make. And then our community updates. Uh-oh, where did my forum supporters go? There they are. They went on the wrong page. But so Daryl made it on there. Congrats, Daryl. So all of our forums and Stack Overflow and GitHub, all of the places that we have a presence where our team engages with the community. We try to help everybody as much as we can, but as a community, because this is open source, we really rely on the community members to also come and learn things and then spread their knowledge. So if you go take a look at the forums and see if there's anything that you can help with, or if you have any questions that you need help with, that is always something that we love to see. We are hiring. So these are the currently open positions. The list is starting to get a little bit smaller, which is good. Well, it's good for us. Hopefully, if you know anybody that might meet one of these titles, go ahead and send them our way. These jobs are all posted on our website, but there are a lot of them also posted on LinkedIn, so you can find them either place. And then another important thing for our community is we have a program called Liquibase Legends, where the things that you do to participate as part of the community and contribute, you can earn points for them. And those points go towards earning titles like Luminary Leader or Legend, which it does take some pretty significant contributions to reach that legend status. Not very many people get there, but it's really cool. And you get some cool swag along with those, digital badges. You can get those points from a bunch of different ways that they're all listed on our Liquibase Legends page on the website. That is right there. And then I will have links when I upload this to YouTube. I will have links to all of our different community platforms in the description. If any of you need any of them now today, let me know and I will send you the links to whichever ones you need. And this space intentionally left blank to remind me that that is the end of my slideshow. So thank you all for coming. Does anybody have any final questions or anything? All right. Well, we really appreciate you all being here. Thank you, Florent, for coming and telling us about all of the cool work that you do and the contributions that you make to your open source community and ours as well. I think it's really awesome that within the open source community, we all kind of help each other out. So thank you so much for giving us this presentation, and thank you all for coming.
All right. Thank you very much, Tabby and Florent. It's good seeing everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Everyone.